I'm Tessa West, a social psychology professor at NYU, and my book, Jerks at Work, Toxic Coworkers and What to Do About Them, is about breaking the mold and developing new strategies for handling that everyday conflict at work that gets in the way of your well-being and productivity. The C-suite is the place where if there's going to be a cultural contagion of jerks, that's where it happens. In the past, if the C-suite had a lot of jerks and you worked, say, in middle management or below, it didn't really affect you so much. But the workplace has changed a lot now, where if the C-suite is behaving one way, even if it doesn't directly affect you as an employee because you never interact with that C-suite, you're just very intolerant for working for a company that embraces this behavior culturally. So what I would say is the C-suite is in a prime place to either kind of turn that jerk behavior on or off because they decide whether that company is going to be a breeding ground for jerk behavior. They decide how fertile it's going to be for certain types of jerk at work. If anyone in the C-suite embraces any of these jerk behaviors, it's just going to kind of fall through the company and trickle down really effectively, really efficiently, because jerkish behavior is contagious at work. And that's really often where we see it starting. There are a lot of different objects that we talked about in the making of the cover of this book. At one point, there was a push pin, but it felt a little too sharp. And I think just this idea of a staple remover with teeth-like, imagery, people can just immediately relate to that. They know what it means to feel like you're working with someone that's just like, kind of coming at you with sharp fangs, so to speak. Absolutely. I think, one thing that we've really learned during the pandemic is that the people that are difficult to work with, we feel like we can avoid them much more. But the reality is they're just as effective at kind of destroying our well-being and our productivity at work as they were before, mostly because we're siloed off from other people at work. And jerks at work have gotten even kind of more clever in the strategies they use to do things behind the scenes. And so when we're not interacting with each other, we're not having casual conversations, water cooler conversations, walking to the coffee shop, stopping by the office of our neighbor, we're not really getting all this information that we used to that kind of signals who's difficult to work with and what the strategies are for dealing with it. So a lot of us are kind of going alone in dealing with jerks at work now that many of us are working from home by ourselves. Why would we use this metaphor of serial killers to profile jerks at work? Why do we need this taxonomy to think about jerks? Aren't all jerks just kind of terrible people at work? And I would say absolutely not. I think, jerks at work, they have skills. They have things that they're really good at that allows them to kind of get away with this behavior. So a lot like a serial killer who's able to do something bad over and over again and never get caught. That's actually often the case with jerks at work. They have a skill set, we often underestimate it, that allows them to get away with this bad behavior, but they also have a set of weaknesses. And each type of jerk that I talk about in my book has kind of one set of skills and another set of weaknesses. And you really need to understand both in order to develop strategies for coping with them. The only real way of solving for jerks at work is to have friends at work, but often not the types of friends that we're thinking about. Not our best friends, not the people that we like to have drinks with and complain about difficult people with, but allies. And allies at work kind of take a different form. So think about someone you work with who you're maybe not best friends with, you're not that close with, but what they have is knowledge about the workplace and a whole bunch of social connections that you don't actually have. So the best allies can actually help you expand your social network, introduce you to potential other targets of your jerk at work, or other people who can pull levers of power to help you understand, what will it take to convince your boss to care about your jerk at work. And these allies can give you novel pieces of advice, but critically, they can introduce you to new folks who your best friend probably doesn't know. I think one of the biggest misconceptions we have about thinking about jerks at work is that they don't have any social skills, that they can't read a room, that they, aren't paying attention to how other people are, supposed to be treating them and these kinds of things. But the reality is most jerks at work actually have incredible social skills. So I think about, for example, the free rider. They tend to be very charismatic. They actually utilize their social skills to get ahead. And the same is true for someone like the kiss up, kick downer. They know exactly the right ways of complimenting you behind your back so that their boss won't suspect them. This conception that our jerks at work don't really know how to read people, they don't really know what's appropriate, is actually wrong. In fact, it's the opposite. They usually have this skill in spades. Another misconception is that they know how their behavior makes other people feel. So most of us assume that if we're dealing with a jerk at work, this person is doing this intentionally and they know it makes other people feel badly. But the reality is almost no one gives negative feedback at work. It's just non-normative to give people negative feedback. We feel uncomfortable doing it, and so we often avoid it. But we assume these individuals really know how their behavior is affecting others, even though they rarely do. And the last misconception about jerks at work is that they enjoy doing what they're doing. I'd say that sure, there are some jerks at work who are Machiavellian and really love watching people, beneath them or at the same level of them struggle. But most of the time, the behavior that jerks are engaging in that harms you actually also harms them. So it doesn't really help them to behave this way, but they're doing it for lots of reasons, ranging from getting poor management skills to doing whatever it takes to get ahead. That's just the culture of the company. But a lot of the times they don't actually enjoy the behaviors they're engaging in, and they're actually detrimental to their own success as well. So why is it important for us to consider whether we are the jerk? Most of us are a combination of good and bad. We can be amazing at work. We can be difficult at work. And I think it's important to think about, what do you look like at work when you're at your absolute worst, when you're sleep deprived, you don't have resources, because I think we all have the potential to be someone who's not ideal, a micromanager, a neglectful boss, a credit stealer, or a freeloader when we get overwhelmed. And I think kind of half the battle in dealing with jerks at work is really detecting your own inner jerk and not just stopping that behavior, but looking at what the behaviors are that precede it. What is it that really turns you into that less ideal version of yourself, and then develop strategies of what you're going to do instead. And I think in my book, I try to be really honest about the times that I've been a jerk at work, because I want it to become normative for people to talk about their own behaviors that have contributed to negative cultures at work, and demonstrating what it looks like to succeed. And especially people who are in leadership roles, they really need to kind of talk about this in a way that isn't just pointing fingers, but is admitting their own mistakes and their own jerk potential, as we kind of go through this process of cleaning out our jerks at work, but also admitting to ourselves when we're contributing to that problem. Why is it important for us to think about whether we're effective allies? I study interpersonal interaction, I study relationships, and there are very few jerks at work who can really thrive without their own allies helping them through the process. So sometimes that means that someone just lets the behavior go. They don't say anything because they feel uncomfortable. Sometimes they're actually encouraging the behavior. There's all these ways that we allow jerks at work to thrive, and we really can fail to help those in need. And I think kind of identifying when you're not necessarily a jerk, well, what are you doing instead? Are you sitting back and letting this happen? Are you actually stepping in and trying to create change? And are you doing it in a way that the targets of your jerk at work are comfortable with? I think some of us have this kind of lay theory that standing up and, making a really kind of big deal out of things, or going to social media to talk about it, are the best, most effective strategies for being an ally. But a lot of people actually don't appreciate that. They kind of want a more subtle, behind the scenes approach. So knowing exactly how you're going to combat the jerks at work, what you're going to do when you witness these things, is just as important in dealing with jerks at work as actually targeting the jerks themselves. Thought I knew what I was doing. I really had this kind of lesson in humility that it doesn't matter how expert you are at your job, how long you've been doing it. I actually study interpersonal interaction for a living. I should have been better at that. But it's really hard to deal with these issues. And we have a lot of lay theories of how we should handle conflict. And I did too. So I'm just as guilty of this. And so what I found in writing this book, as I talk to different people, is it doesn't matter what you do for a living. You could be a hairstylist, you could be a CEO, and it doesn't matter how long you've been working. You can be, right out of graduate school, right out of college, right out of high school in your first job, or you can be working for 30 years. No one learns these strategies, and people don't get better with practice. They don't get better over time. They get better when they actually learn science-based strategies of how to deal with these things, and myself included. So I really had to teach myself some new lessons when I was doing research for this book. Oh, I thought this, strategy worked really well, but in fact, the research goes against that, to kind of force myself to embrace, my own advice in this book. And I was constantly surprised at how off my own lay theories were, even as a researcher, when it came to dealing with jerks at work.